The Subcommittee on Information Technology and the Subcommittee on Government Operations will come to order. Without objection, the Chair is authorized to declare recess at any time. And I now recognize myself for 5 minutes for my opening remarks. Good afternoon. Appreciate y'all being here today. Today's hearing is part of this committee's continuing oversight of federal IT. This began with GAO's high-risk report and the designation of IT acquisition on that report back in February of 2015, and it's been a priority of ours ever since. And due to the importance we place on this issue, our committee staffs worked with GAO to develop a scorecard to assess agencies' Fitara implementation efforts. This bipartisan scorecard has been issued every 6 months, beginning 2 years ago on November 4th, 2015. The scorecard has evolved each iteration in response to GAO recommendations and stakeholder feedback. Scorecard 5.0 adds a 5th graded category to assess agencies' management of software licenses. We previewed this category as part of Scorecard 4.0. For Scorecard 6.0, a measure of whether agencies have established working capital funds as authorized by the MGT Act, which I was pleased to see included in the final NDAA, will be made a part of the scorecard. Ultimately, I'd like to see the scorecard evolve beyond Fitara implementation to more of a digital hygiene score for agencies. Adding megabyte implementation to this scorecard is a step in that direction. The inclusion of software licensing had a negative overall impact on the grades. Since the last scorecard, 3 agencies' grades increased, 15 agency grades stayed the same, and 6 decreased. If software licensing were not included, 8 agencies' grades would have increased, 14 would have stayed the same, and 2 would have decreased. So progress is being made, just not as quick as it should be and needs to be. Legacy IT is a continuing fiscal and cybersecurity risk to our nation. Though 17 agencies received an F on this new metric for the Fitara Scorecard 5.0, it is worth noting that each of these agencies has efforts underway to create and use an inventory of software licenses. I hope to hear from each agency today how they plan to improve their score in this area. I also hope to hear from Mr. Pauner his thoughts on where we will be government-wide on this metric in 6 months for Scorecard 6.0. Today's hearing features 3 panels with officials from the Department of Energy, the United States Agency for International Development, and the Small Business Administration. Their grades are D+, A-, and C-. As always, I'm honored to be exploring these issues in a bipartisan fashion with my friend and ranking member, the Honorable Robin Kelly from Illinois. I'm also pleased to be joined by Chairman Meadows and Ranking Member Conley from the Government Operations Subcommittee. Could not have asked for better partners in the effort to modernize technology in the federal government, and I thank my colleagues and the witnesses and all who have joined us in person, or for those folks who are watching online, for participating today. I now recognize my friend, the ranking member of the Information Technology Subcommittee, Ms. Kelly, for 5 minutes in her opening statement.
Before we begin today's hearing, I also want to thank you, Chairman Hurd, Chairman Meadows, and Ranking Member Conley for your steadfast leadership as our subcommittees continue working together to oversee the improvement of federal IT systems. I'm glad to have such great partners in this endeavor. Improving the efficiency and security of the federal government's IT systems is essential to our nation's security. Crucial to that effort is the ongoing oversight conducted by our subcommittees to hold agencies accountable for implementing key aspects of the Federal Information Technology Acquisition Reform Act. An important part of that oversight has been the scorecard our subcommittees develop for grading agency progress and meeting the Fitara requirements. Today, our subcommittee released the 5th version of the scorecard. It's been 2 years since we released the first one and held our first hearing on this issue. Since that time, we've strengthened the role of the CIO at many agencies, increased transparency in project management, and we've saved billions of taxpayer dollars. I'm proud of the work we've accomplished together so far. The new scorecard, however, shows that progress is difficult and that we still have a long way to go. For example, as the chairman talked about, while some agencies like the U.S. Agency for International Development has done well, going from a D in 2015 to an A- today, others like the SBA has fallen behind, going from D in 2015 to a C- today. Overall, the grades for only 3 agencies went up on this scorecard. 15 stayed the same, and 6 actually went down. The scorecard makes clear that agencies still have a long way to go to address the challenge of reducing the growing number of federal data centers. The Fitara Enhancement Act that was introduced by Ranking Member Connolly earlier this year would extend the timeline for agencies to close any unneeded data centers. The bill will also provide greater support to agencies' CIOs in their effort to eliminate and consolidate large numbers of data centers. Since the release of the last scorecard, the subcommittees have added software licensing as a metric of performance to this one. The overall grades in this category indicate that agencies are struggling when it comes to the management of their software licenses. I am concerned about this most recent scorecard performance and look forward to hearing from today's agencies on the struggles and challenges they are facing in Fitara implementation and how Congress can be more helpful. There is simply too much at stake when it comes to Fitara. This isn't just about saving taxpayer money, it's about improving the overall digital hygiene of the federal government, and the scored metrics here are the basics of running any shop. I want to thank the witnesses for testifying today. Mr. Powner, you might just be the most popular witness on the Hill. This is your 5th hearing with us on Fitara. I'm also looking forward to hearing from all the agencies here today. Thank you so much. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Ranking Member. And when the other members get here and want to do opening remarks, we can do that at the next panel. But let's go ahead and get into our first panel. I'd like to introduce the witnesses. As the gentlewoman from Illinois recognized, Mr. Dave Powner, one of holds the record of number of times coming before this committee, the Director of IT Management Issues at the Government Accountability Office. Max Everett, Chief Information Officer at the Department of Energy, Ms. Allison Doon, Acting Chief Financial Officer at the Department of Energy, and Mr. John Bashista, Director of Acquisition Management, also at DOE, and Ms. Barbara Helland, Associate Director of Advanced Scientific Computing Research at the Department of Energy. Appreciate y'all being here. And pursuant to committee rules, all witnesses will be sworn before you testify, so please rise and raise your right hand. Do you solemnly swear or affirm that the testimony you are about to give is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God? Thank you. Let the record reflect all witnesses answered in the affirmative. In order to allow time for discussion, please limit your testimony to 5 minutes, and your entire written statement will be made part of the record. As a reminder, the clock in front of you shows your remaining time. The light will turn yellow when you have 30 seconds left, and the red is when your time is up. Please also remember to push the button to turn on your microphone before speaking. And now I'd like to recognize Mr. Dave Powner for his opening remarks.
Chairman Hurd, Ranking Member Kelly, and members of the subcommittees, I would like to thank you and your staff for your continued oversight on the implementation of Fitara with this 5th set of grades. We've added a 5th category to grade, software licensing, at your request, so now the Fitara scorecard covers 5 of the 7 major areas of this law. Overall, 3 agencies' grades went up: Education, OPM, and SBA. 6 went down, and 15 remained the same. Of the 6 that went down, Energy, DHS, HUD, Transportation, EPA, and Justice, none had a software license inventory and received Fs in this subcategory. Regarding the software license area, 6 months ago when you previewed this area with Scorecard 4.0, only 3 agencies had complete inventories. Now 7 do. And 6 of these 7 report savings in this area: Ag, Education, GSA, NASA, VA, and USAID. Those 6 receive A's for this. Labor gets a C, and 17 agencies without inventories receive F's. Progress, but clearly not enough, given that this was a major section of Fitara and was followed up with the Megabyte Act. Another area where significant progress needs to be made is optimizing data centers. SSA, EPA, and GSA report solid progress against the 5 optimization metrics. Education and HUD are out of the data center business as they no longer have any agency-owned data centers. The other 19 agencies have a ways to go to optimize these centers. A key point here is that additional and substantial savings can still be realized as we see better utilization of these facilities and equipment. I'd like to conclude this overview by thanking this committee, Chairman Hurd and Meadows, and Ranking Members Kelly and Connolly, and your dedicated staff, not only for your consistent and thorough oversight of Fitara, but also for your follow-up with the Fitara extension and the MGT Act to give agencies more time to implement more completely and to provide additional avenues for reinvesting savings in modernization priorities. Now turning to the Department of Energy. Energy plans to spend about $1.8 billion on IT this year. About half of this spending is for IT programs at the National Nuclear Security Administration. Energy's grades have fluctuated over the 5 scorecards between Fs and Cs, and their current grade is a D+. The plus here is of major significance, and I would very much like to commend Max Everett and the department's leadership, as Energy is the only agency that has elevated their CIO reporting since Fitara was enacted. Another positive note is in the area of incremental development, where they received an A. This is consistent with the report that we just issued on this topic, where Energy was only one of 4 agencies that had incremental certification policy consistent with OMB guidance in Fitara. Turning to areas where Energy needs to improve, let's start with CIO tenure. Since 2004, the average CIO tenure at Energy has only been 1.7 years. This is a major issue and reason why IT has not been effectively managed. On data centers, Energy has reported saving $21 million between 2012 and 2017. However, they report not meeting any of the 5 metrics and have no additional planned savings. Their closures will fall short of OMB's goals for both small and large centers. The bottom line here is that if you're short on metrics, there is likely more closures and savings to be had. Energy's software license inventory is not complete. It covers CIO-controlled licenses, and they are working on completing the inventory for the other components. Finally, I'd like to note that our work for this committee on IT budgeting and CIO authorities shows that Energy CIO has challenges in the area of IT budgeting and execution, meaning that there needs to be more visibility into the IT budget and better governance over their important system acquisitions. Mr. Chairman, this concludes my comments on the Department of Energy.
Thank you, Mr. Powner. Now, every agency is going to provide 1 oral remarks, and I believe, Mr. Everett, you're going to do that for Department of Energy. So now you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Good afternoon, Chairman Hurd, and Ranking Member Meadows, Ranking Member Kelly, and Ranking Member Conley, and distinguished members of the committee. On behalf of the Secretary and Deputy Secretary, I want to thank you for inviting me to testify about the Department of Energy's implementation of Fitara. Fitara and its cybersecurity complement, FISMA, provide me the authority I need to manage DOE's information technology resources and cybersecurity program. I would also like to just mention my colleagues who have come up here who are helping us that you introduced. They're going to be a critical part of telling you about the progress we're making at the department. I would also like to acknowledge the dedicated career and contractor IT and cybersecurity professionals across the department whose critical efforts transcend changes in administration. The team provided me a strong baseline from which to build, specifically Mr. Robbie Green, who did an outstanding job as acting DOE CIO prior to my appointment. In order to effectively exercise Fitara responsibilities, I now report directly to the Secretary and Deputy Secretary, as Mr. Powner noted. They recognize not only the statutory requirement for this, but it's a best practice for public and private sector organizations to have technology leadership represented at the executive level. This change originated with a secretarial memorandum and is reflected in the DOE organizational chart. I have regular meetings with the Deputy Secretary, who every month calls to order the department's senior leadership to evaluate progress on DOE's IT and cybersecurity strategic goals. My reporting and working relationships with them are evidence of the success of this Fitara requirement. Direct access to senior leadership is critical to effective IT management at the program office level as well. My office is developing guidance to program offices with embedded CIOs or officials with CIO-like functions that they follow the Fitara reporting model and elevate these officials to a direct reporting relationship with their respective senior leadership. The Deputy Secretary has instructed that my office should be engaged in the hiring process for any IT Management Series 2210s across the department. Both at DOE and throughout federal government, the traditional outdated model of an IT worker is a challenge. We need professionals with multidisciplinary skills, not just the coding and network and typical skills that we look at for IT professionals. With respect to consolidation and optimization of data centers, we've closed 84 data centers since 2010, resulting in savings of approximately $21 million, and plan to shutter another 11 more by the end of FY 2018. That said, we need to do more in this area, which is why we're examining ways to effectively accelerate that process. One catalyst for optimizing DOE data centers is our expanded use of cloud services. Our diverse department, with 97 sites in 27 states, can see significant value from increasing our use of cloud computing. The national labs are an integral component of the department, and as CIO, I engage with the labs through a number of means, including the annual laboratory planning and appraisal reviews. I have the opportunity to comment on national lab IT activities and can refocus our efforts to address our concerns through the development of performance evaluation and measurement plans, which define notable outcomes that the labs must meet in the coming year. I have regular meetings with our national lab CIOs. I also speak regularly with the national lab directors, as well as the lab operating board, and participate in their governance meetings. DOE is closely monitoring the pending MGT Act to leverage any benefits that come out of that. We intend to use Fitara as well to continue to be more granular and transparent in our IT costs in order to prioritize the digital transformation that we need to undertake as a department. In detailing the changes, improvements, and the many challenges that I've seen, it's been my aim to demonstrate that our department is moving in the right direction. The department's IT and cybersecurity governance mechanisms are inclusive, transparent, and we're seeking to facilitate timely performance of our diverse mission. I firmly believe we're continuing to advance and improve, which would not be possible without the authorities granted by Fitara. I'm encouraged by the interest and the efforts of this committee, and the efforts as well shown by our leadership at the department, and I look forward to achieving those shared goals. It's been my distinct honor to testify here today, and I'll be pleased now to address your questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Everett. Now I'm going to recognize the gentleman from Montana, Mr. Gianforte, for 5 minutes of questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Ranking Member Kelly. I'm new on the Hill. I spent my career in the private sector doing IT deployments for large organizations, including deployments at 170 federal agencies, so I very much appreciate each being here. I wanted to focus on 3 specific things. First, from Mr. Pauner generally, and then Mr. Everett specifically at DOE, around some best practices that are used in the private sector and to what extent they're present. You've already mentioned one, Mr. Everett, the movement to the cloud. Why don't we start there? I'm curious, Mr. Pauner, to what extent is movement to the cloud a priority within the agencies that you work with and audit? And do you have any metrics around percentage of enterprise applications moved into cloud facilities?
I don't have good metrics on those percentages, but we have tracked movement to the cloud as a percentage of their IT budget. That's been somewhere in, like, on average, it's about 4 to 5% when you look at agencies' IT budgets. So the bottom line on this is clearly there needs to be more movement to the cloud. You know, we started this years ago, and the security was the big concern, and then you had the Intel community go into the cloud, and folks felt more comfortable with that. We clearly need to go more to the cloud. I think when you look at the data center situation, there are about at least a third of the agencies that project they're going to be nowhere near optimizing their centers, and they ought to be looking to outsource that and go towards the cloud, you know, for many of those data centers and everything. A couple agencies are already out of the business. We probably need a few more of them if they can't manage this more effectively.
And when you say cloud, do you mean consolidated data centers, or are you actually moving to more commercial multi-tenant applications?
It's all over the board. There's, you know, infrastructure as a service. You also got software as a service. So it's both the infrastructure and some of the applications. When you look, clearly, when you look at the commodity or business systems, that's kind of a no-brainer in a lot of those areas. We ought to be going more towards cloud services. There's some big applications, electronic health records. I know we've talked to the chairman about this a lot with the VA and DOD going to the common electronic health record. There's commercial products that are out there.
Okay, Mr. Everett at DOE.
Sure. So I would certainly address across the federal government. I think the numbers are disappointing. At DOE, I think they're, you know, having come in, I think they're very disappointing. We need to be moving much more quickly on, again, I think you hit on the commodity IT activities. We need to move more quickly to the cloud. I think that will help us certainly with data center. I think there is some value to moving out of federal data centers into hosted environments, not as an end goal, but I think that starts to break some of the workforce and cultural challenges we have. We've got to have the right skill sets to make a move to a cloud. It is different skill sets. It's much more about managing services, managing service levels rather than managing people and sort of the turning dials. We've got to do a lot of work around that. Those things have to go together. I believe they can go together in parallel. In some cases, frankly, my hope is that we just find some things and rip the Band-Aid and just move things. We've got a lot of commodity things that should, frankly, be able to move very quickly to the cloud.
Yeah, as we talk about these scorecards, it might be interesting to look at what percentage have we moved to the cloud. I know in our own experience doing these enterprise deployments, an off-the-shelf cloud deployment typically can speed deployment by 5x and typically reduces operating costs by 80% over the life of the system, and that's just good for taxpayers, and it's better from a security perspective. The second area I want to talk on, you mentioned the shortage of labor, particularly in the cybersecurity area. One of the practices in the private sector is the use of commercial third-party firms for either cybersecurity audits or penetration testing. To what extent is that a general practice, Mr. Powner, and then specifically at DOE?
I think when you start looking at contractors and third parties, it's pretty heavy in the federal government. I think the challenge in the federal government is having enough of an IT workforce to oversee those contractors. I mean, because we got prime contracts, and then you got program management that's being outsourced to private sector firms. Clearly, the security penetration tests and all that's going out. So the challenge, I think, in the government is having enough of qualified IT workforce to oversee those key contracts where we don't have the internal skills.
Okay. Mr. Everett, we have about 30
I would
seconds.
concur with that. I think one of our challenges is frankly, we're very contractor heavy. We depend on the skills that our contractors bring, but our federal workforce has got to have some skills in terms of, again, managing them, managing business requirements, managing the budgets around that. I think those are a critical element to doing that. And and again, that takes some of the federal workforce. They have to know the right questions. They have to be looking for the right solutions to then bring in the proper contracting talent and capability. And I think that recruiting, from your private sector experience as I do, that's an extraordinary challenge we face right now.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
The gentleman yields back. Now I recognize Ms. Kelly for 5 minutes of questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The committee's scorecard shows that since the release of one of its last scorecards, June 2017, many agencies appear to have hit roadblocks in their progress under Fitara. For example, as we've talked about, the current scorecard shows that the overall letter grades for 15 agencies stayed the same, 6 went down and only 3 increased. Mr. Powner, in which of the 5 key areas of Fitara that was scored has GAO found agencies are struggling the most?
Well, clearly, when you look back on the 4.0, I think the data center optimization, because we added the metrics category there, it wasn't just based on savings, and that was at the request of a lot of folks. And again, there's 2 agencies that are out of the data center business, 3 agencies doing a decent job, and 19 that I would say are doing poorly. And that's a big reason why the grades went down. And then now with 5.0, when you have 17 agencies getting Fs because they don't have a software license inventory, that's a key reason. So those are the 2 big ones.
Mm-hmm. And so what accounts for the challenges? Is it just the software license, or what's accounting for the challenges?
I think when you look at the data centers, I do think it's, given where we were at, for instance, on server utilization, to try to go from a 9 to 12% to 65% metric that OMB has, okay, that's a big leap. The software licensing, I have a hard time understanding that. We did a report 4 years ago that told agencies that they should get software licenses. It was in Fitara. It's one of the 7 sections. You followed up with Megabyte. I think it's inexcusable that we do not have software license inventories at this point in time.
Thank you. Mr. Everett, the Department of Energy was one of 3 agencies whose letter grade actually went down. What are the challenges you're facing?
There's a number, as you can clearly see. I think, look, the reality is our scorecard accurately represents some significant challenges we have. And Mr. Powner hit on, frankly, 2 of them. One of them is We have too many data centers that we don't have a handle around, and we need to more aggressively, again, part of this is on the data centers, we're doing some things around DCIM, which gives us some better measurements of actually how we're using those existing data centers. I think that will drive some business requirements and some business cases to close some and help us actually use them better. But the better answer to that is move to the cloud. Again, for things that are simple commodity, the answer is we got to get to the cloud and we got to do it faster. I can't disagree either on the side. Look, some of my non-technical colleagues in the department have asked me, why don't we have a software asset inventory? And they're right. It shouldn't be that hard. Now, I will say that we did a data call. We have, I think, over 64,000 lines within the database we collected of that. We have a significant inventory. It's not complete, and we're not going to represent it as complete until it is. The vast majority of that came back was, in fact, provided electronically, so that exists in pockets and parts of our department. We have a number of gaps in the department, areas that don't have that capability. So one of the things we're doing is we're going back and looking at CDM. We have gaps in our CDM deployment, and we're actually going back and trying to line that up and find out, all right, where do we have gaps within programs and offices that need help at the enterprise level from my office to come back and fill the gaps so that we can have a complete software asset inventory. And again, I just want to add, the software asset inventory is valuable not just to have it. It drives, as I work with our acquisition team, and work in conjunction with them, it's going to save us money. We know that for a fact. It's going to help us reduce our threat surface because it's going to tell us what kind of software we have or don't have. And then it's going to help us drive our IT transformation as we can see the gaps in capability, or frankly, where we have overlapping capability, where we probably have people buying 2 or 3 different of the same capability in different software packages. That just needs to be eliminated. So there's no painting any other way. It's, again, I understand many people are failing at it, but it's not rocket science. It's not hard, and we're pushing rapidly through those means to get it fixed.
And do you have any, not saying everything all at once, but any time projections, or what do you see?
So with respect to, certainly with the software inventory piece, we're in the process right now. We've brought somebody in to actually help us be strategic about CDM. And again, our focus there is what are the gaps? We have a lot of people who have really great capabilities that meet many of the CDM requirements and needs. What we're looking for is where are the gaps? And then as an enterprise, as a department, how do we come in and help them fill those gaps? And again, because we have a very federated, diverse department, we have a lot of good best practices. We've got a lot of labs and other folks who have great tools in place. We're working with them to get actually what's working for them and try and replicate that or build it across the department. I'll say on data centers, one of the immediate things we're working on is we've had some folks working on this DCM pilot. And again, our labs have actually led the way. A number of our labs have put DCM tools in place and have worked with my team to share best practices that we can do across the department. So our next step there is a pilot that we expand across the department. That's going to give us a more accurate picture. And I think what it's going to show is that we have a lot of data centers we just don't need anymore.
Thank you.
My first question is actually for Mr. Powner, but you're going to have to look for something. Towards the end of your statement, you talked about budget and system acquisition. I want you to pull that up, and while you're looking for that, I'm going to go to Mr. Everett. Mr. Everett, take about 30 seconds and tell me how your position changed from reporting directly to the agency head or the deputy agency head.
Sure. Well, as I walked into the department in July, obviously I'd done a little research before I walked in. I knew that was the case. I've been around federal government and private sector the last number of years, so I was very aware that this is a challenge across government. And I knew walking in the door that was something I was going to immediately have changed. The good news for me was I have a secretary and a deputy secretary, both of whom have seen in public and private sector that was valuable and important. They understood without really any argument from me that was simply a best practice. And so literally, it probably would have even happened faster. It just took a while to get the memo written and get it passed up to the front office. But for our office, I'll simply tell you that our leadership understood that it wasn't even really a question. It was an expectation that IT would be part of the leadership and part of this process.
I would like to attribute that to Secretary Perry's training at the illustrious Texas A&M University for giving him that understanding. And without objection, I'd like to introduce into the record a memo from Max Everett to the Secretary of Department of Energy about the designation of the CIO as a direct report to the Secretary or Deputy Secretary. So ordered. For those that are going to read about this on FedScoop, and CIOs that are not reporting directly to an agency head or deputy agency head, they should see this memo. And unfortunately, there are still 12 departments or agencies where the federal CIO doesn't report directly. I just want to clarify a point, Mr. Everett, because I think you addressed it fairly well. Can you answer that you know 100% of what's on your network?
Right now, I would have to tell you the answer is no. And I think the vast majority of people who tell you that, I'm not sure that they're being accurate.
Gotcha. Because my assumption is if you have a number of agencies that don't understand what software they have on their system, they also don't know what hardware they have on their system, and that introduction of unknown vulnerabilities is scary. Mr. Pounder, did you find the quote I was looking for?
Yes, I did.
Can you repeat that statement, please?
Finally, I'd like to note that our work for this committee on IT budgeting and CIO authority shows that Energy CIO has challenges in the areas of IT budgeting and execution, meaning that there needs to be better visibility into the IT budget and better governance over their system acquisitions.
Ms. Doon, you're the CFO, correct? Acting CFO?
Yes.
What are you going to do to help Mr. Everett with that problem?
We have been working, the CFO office has been working with CIO since the enactment of Fitara to do just that, to improve the alignment of the IT portfolio with the budgeting process. Even before the OMB guidance was issued back in 2015 for the FY17 budget cycle, we issued guidance out to all the program offices to have them identifying their IT spend by program activity and by project. CIO did the likewise, so that their IT portfolio would start delineating the IT across the entire department.
Ms. Doon, do you have financial responsibilities over the national laboratories as well?
The National Laboratories' financial responsibility is managed by the program offices. So they report and they submit their budget requests up through the program offices who put their budgets included in their program office budgets that come to CFO.
So as the CFO of Department of Energy, you have the similar challenges that your colleague, Mr. Everett, has with the siloed activities by the national labs, that even though you're responsible for all of Department of Energy, that you may not have the greatest insight into that. Is that an accurate statement?
It is an accurate statement, but I would suggest that it's getting better. With the expansion of the IT portfolio over the last couple of years, we and CIO have expanded the number of data elements that the program offices are providing us. So we are now able to reconcile the IT portfolio with the budget submission that we are getting from the program offices. And I think one of the biggest benefits that we've had, we started working directly with CIO from the very beginning of the enactment of Fitara. I think the biggest accomplishment has been the budget and financial management staff in the program offices and their IT counterparts working closely together for the first time. And I think that's where we're going to begin to see more visibility and better transparency in the spend, both at the federal program office level and at the national laboratory level.
Thank you. The gentleman from the Commonwealth of Virginia is now recognized for his 5 minutes of questions.
I thank the chair and welcome to the panel. By the way, I would say to my friend from Montana, as someone who also spent 20 years in the private sector before coming here, in the technology sector, one might look for metrics. If you want to know how you're doing in cloud, look at the data on data center consolidation, because you're not moving to the cloud if that's not being consolidated. If you're consolidating it, you are moving to the cloud because you have to. Now, Mr. Everett, let me just say, I believe you get it, and I believe you are an agent of change, and I think the memo the chairman cited gives evidence of that. So don't take this hostilely. But your words are welcome, but you got an F in data center consolidation. Your score went down, not up, which suggests regression. It is the Department of Energy, the national labs, that kind of in the dead of night went to the U.S. Senate and got an exemption for themselves. The ink wasn't even dry in Fitara. Last time I checked, that's under your purview, which would suggest resistance to change, to trying to get this right. So why should we believe, you notwithstanding, all of you being sincere human beings, why should we not believe that, frankly, the Department of Energy is retrograde, they're not with the program, they're not cooperating, they're treading water in the hopes we'll give up and stop looking, and progress, is just not in the forecast?
Well, we have to make that change.
I can't hear you.
Apologies. Ranking Member, I think the answer is we have to make that change. I hope that you don't give up.
Oh, we won't give up.
I know you won't, but even beyond my tenure, I hope that you don't give up. One of the reasons that Ms. Helland is up here is I can tell you in my 4.5 months at the department, her work in the Office of Science has been a huge help and a huge part of correcting some of those issues. I can tell you that our approach, and this starts directly with my secretary and deputy secretary, and I've been in their presence when they told this directly to the lab directors, was that there is one department. That is their expectation. That is the expectation they have given to me. That is the expectation I repeat on a regular basis. And so I believe that's, history aside, I believe that's a starting point. I'm glad that Ms. Helen joined us, but because, again, she has been an ally to me. I think she can talk about some of the work she's actually been doing to help us build some of the reporting mechanisms around SIPC, around Fitara, around how we hold the labs to the level of accountability that we expect for everyone in the federal government.
And I want to hear that from Ms. Helen, but just one more. But you got an F in data center consolidation, which is the heart and soul of Fitara. It's how we save money. It's how we reinvest in ourselves. It's an actual metric whereby we measure, are we making progress or not? Tell me why you got an F.
Because we haven't done the job. I mean, there is no way around it.
All right. Have you set metrics for yourself internally? Okay.
We have.
Okay. How many data centers are there in the Department of Energy?
I'll pull it up here, but there are
All right. Take your time while we listen to Ms. Helen.
289.
289. Okay. He's telling the truth, right? No, that's it. So 289. Have you set a goal for yourself that by a year from now or the next report card, there'll be X, 289 minus X?
The existing goal is 11, is to reduce it by 11.
By 11.
By 11.
Well, that's a pretty modest goal.
I think that's exceedingly modest.
So can we be a little more robust in our goal setting?
We will be more robust, and we are pulling together and working hard. I want to be thoughtful. I don't want to give a number I can't back up.
I understand.
But at the same time, no, the answer is 11 is a pittance.
But so I would just say also again to my friend from Montana, and I think he would agree, I have experience both in the public sector and the private sector. If you don't set heroic goals, stretch goals, nothing happens. Now, not impossible goals, because then nothing happens either, but stretch goals. And so 11 is hardly a stretch goal, and I hope when you come back here, you're able to say, well, we set 11 and it's 110. We got it off by a 0. My time's going to run out, but Ms. Holland, I want to give you an opportunity to comment on the national labs.
Thank you. We actually started in 2015, July of 2015, working with the Office of Science Labs, and at that time, we also had 3 energy labs that we were working with to look at our lab planning and appraisal process, which is a way that we actually included CIOs in that process so that we could see, we asked them to report on their current IT spending and their current research computing so that this instrument became effective for the other program offices in the offices.
Mm-hmm. Well, I just want to say in closing that I echo what the chairman and Ms. Kelly said. What makes me feel better about your score is you, because I think you are committed to making this happen, and the reporting sequence is now right. And when you're in that kind of position, you can make things happen, and it's pretty clear you're committed to doing that. And so we'll back you up. We'll help you. We're not going away. And I applaud my colleague, Mr. Hurd, on the Republican side of the aisle for absolutely, and Mr. Meadows isn't here, but the 4 of us, are just not going to give up. And we're here to try to both nudge and support and use it to your advantage. Thank you so much. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Now it's my pleasure to recognize the distinguished gentlewoman from the District of Columbia, Mrs. Eleanor Holmes Norton, for her 5 minutes of questioning.
I thank my friend for yielding, and I thank him for this this hearing and our witnesses for their informative testimony. This is a hearing about the Federal Information Technology Reform Act, the act itself. I'm trying not to use letters and acronyms. And it's essentially about IT and the progress we are making at a time when that can determine in private industry go or stop. I regard it as just as important for the federal government. I was intrigued by the work of the chief information officers, that GAO looked at how enhanced authority was assisting the chief information officers in certifying major IT investments. And here's where I need clarification. They said, and I'm quoting here, adequately implementing incremental development. I got intrigued. What in the world is that? And had staff look it up and discovered that adequately implementing incremental development is for the investment to deliver functionality every 6 months. So in order for me to understand what that meant, I took as an example, since you were testifying here, the Department of Energy, because it was among the agencies that achieved an A score on in this particular category. What was responsible? You make me understand incremental development. If you apply it to the Department of Energy and make me understand how the Department of Energy earned an A rating for incremental development.
So I'd love to take all the credit for that, but that, I think, has been a historical strength of the department. And again, some of our career folks have been a key component of keeping that going. The focus of that is around, I don't think it's a secret to many of us who've been around DC that historically, when departments engage in long multi-year projects, those tend to have significant problems in financial management and delivery. So I think it's a very good thing to be measuring that, because the importance of that is when you're actually delivering capability, this is, in the private industry, we would typically call it sort of agile development. You're constantly adding, showing capability. You're demonstrating that you're actually producing something. The flip side of that would be if we did some large multi-year development and said, we'll start here, and 2 years later, we'll see what happens. Historically, that has been a very poor management technique in IT, certainly in the federal government. What I've observed so far at the Department of Energy is, I think we're deserving of that grade, because I think there's a lot of focus on, again, that incremental movement to make sure we're delivering something in sort of bite-sized, manageable chunks.
That really does make me understand it. It certainly makes me understand why this every 6 months. And for IT, clearly every 6 months is important. But since you already are looking every 6 months, what would you suggest for those who don't have? I mean, you're looking at them every 6 months too. So what do they need to do so that every 6 months, do we need a shorter time frame for people who don't have A scores, for example?
Yeah, I mean, I think you got to start, you may start to drive the metric a little shorter. You may not necessarily have delivery, but finding ways to measure that. Again, the goal of it is just practically to be intermittently actually watching and seeing what's
Well,
going on.
does it in fact result in increases in the score?
Oh, it does. I mean, it certainly has for us.
By looking every 6 months, even with those who haven't received this A rating, then their ratings tend to go up because you're looking every 6 months.
Yeah, I mean, I think you constantly got to watch that and measure it and make sure that they really are showing actual measurable deliverables and improvements.
Mr. Powner, did you have anything to add to that?
No, I think it's clearly a best practice to go with shorter deliveries instead of longer deliveries. I do think, when we measure this, we know where all the warts are looking under the covers here. So the one thing is this is how they plan. If you look closely at whether they deliver against the plan, it might be a little less, so we shouldn't get too comfortable. The other thing that I would like to say is, as we understand more what we actually spend on IT, there's probably more software development projects that should get listed under this category, and it might not look so rosy. So I don't want to rain on the parade, But I do think it's important to make sure we understand that there's still work for some of those agencies that have A's. Go small and it's much better.
Appreciate that criticism. And thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Couple quick questions for you, Ms. Dune, and you, Ms. Helen. Ms. Dune, what are you going to do to help Mr. Everett populate the working capital fund that we are going to create with the successful implementation of the MGT Act?
Well, once the MGT is enacted, we'll have to take a look at the structure of the working capital fund. DOE has an existing working capital fund, and there are several line items in our current working capital fund that are managed by CIO. The most significant one is a cybersecurity investment of about $35 million, which is intended for enterprise-wide cybersecurity. So we already leverage our existing working capital fund to support his efforts in a number of areas, including network support as well.
So the working capital funds created by MGT is something that only the CIO can touch. And it's to put money that is saved from doing things like transitioning into the cloud, getting your software licensing under control, because the savings that they're going to realize, they're not going to be able to use in that calendar year. How do we make sure that that's captured so that by the end of next fiscal year, that money is transferred into that account?
Yeah, that would be something that we would have to look at. And yes, if this were a mechanism totally dedicated to capturing the savings from the variety of IT savings, then that would be something that we could do and perhaps look at that and see if that could then support it, because that would be a mechanism that would target that money, those savings, directly recouping them and allowing CIO to invest into much-needed enterprise IT modernization.
Do you think we can do that within a calendar year? 12 months. There's only one answer to that, by the way.
It's certainly a very straightforward request to recapture savings. The challenge is identifying those savings and getting them captured and moving them over.
As long as you're in this position, are you committed to helping Mr. Everett do that?
Oh, absolutely.
Mr. Bashista, you involved too?
Yes, sir. A number of initiatives that we're supporting the CIO. As we discussed, the CFO and CIO in procurement and contracting, we face a lot of the same challenges, being decentralized. So on a programmatic
I get it, but are you going to help Mr. Everett make sure we capture that savings when he improves the software licensing, introduces CDM and figures out their technology doesn't have, and he saves money? Are you going to help us make sure that and work with Mrs. Dune in getting that in an MGT working capital fund?
Absolutely.
Awesome. Ms. Helen, the National Laboratory CIO's Council, who does that report to?
Actually reports to, I mean, it was formed by the national lab, the CIOs at the national labs, for them to identify common practices and best practices across the labs so that they could work together. Technically, I'm not sure it reports to anybody, but we certainly, both Max and I, sat on the executive board.
Mr. Everett, do you have a response to that?
So the NLCIO Council reports to the, I believe it's to the National Lab Directors Executive Council.
Do you have insight into the types of things the CIOs at the national labs are putting on their network?
We do, and we don't have full, and again, and I tell you, in all honesty, I don't have that fully on our current network. We are in the process, and again, at the direction of our Deputy Secretary, within 2 weeks of his joining, we put forward a memo under his name that I am responsible for as part of our IJC3, which is our enterprise SOC, that all elements of the department, including all laboratories, sites, federal program offices, everybody is going to be responsible, and we're working right now to deliver certain data that I have put together a taxonomy on that will come up for us in a consolidated manner so that we have, and again, that's an initial visibility across every network in the department. The move from that will be to then incorporate the CDM capabilities, to your point, so that we can see hardware, software, all the other pieces, so that we can have that visibility of our cybersecurity posture across the entire department, labs included.
Great, and Mr. Powner, I'm looking forward to GAO reviewing and ensuring that that is moving in that direction. I want to thank our witnesses for appearing before us.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes, sir.
Just a footnote to
I
your
yield to
line.
my gentleman, my friend from the Commonwealth.
I thank my friend. I was listening, your questioning of Ms. Dune. If you're looking for more savings, maybe you might expand that goal of 11 data centers being consolidated. I was just doing a little quick math on the back of my envelope, and with that, if that's our annual goal, it's going to take 27 years to address the total number of data centers you've got at the Department of Energy. So, I mean, I do think there's some real room for expansion there that would have big payoff, and the MGT legislation rewards it. And oh, by the way, working with Mr. Panner and my colleagues, the Fitara extension bill that extends the sunsets, including a data center consolidation, is, as we speak, on its way to the President for his signature. So there will be several more years of scrutiny over data center consolidation. So use that time and effectuate those savings, especially in anticipation of the authority you're going to get, especially through the leadership of my friend Mr. Hurd, in the MGT legislation. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. I'd like to thank our witnesses for appearing before us today. The subcommittees will now have a very, very brief recess, 2 minutes, to set up for our second panel. The subcommittees stand in recess, subject to the call of the chair. The illustrious Dave Powner, Mr. Jay Mahanand, the CIO for the U.S. Agency for International Development, Mr. Reginald Mitchell, CFO for USAID, and Mr. Wade Warren, Acting Deputy Administration at USAID. Welcome to you all. And pursuant to committee rules, all witnesses will be sworn in before they testify, so please rise and raise your right hand. Do you solemnly swear or affirm the testimony you're about to give is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God? Thank you. Let the record reflect All witnesses answer in the affirmative. Again, in order to allow time for discussion, please limit your testimony to 5 minutes. The entire written statement will be made part of the record. Again, as a reminder, the clock in front of you, when it turns yellow, you have 30 seconds. When it turns red, your time is up. And please turn on and off your microphone. I now recognize Mr. Powner for an abbreviated statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. USAID plans to spend about $40 million on IT this year. 82% of this is used for operational systems, leaving just over $25 million for new development. One of the largest investments is its financial management system that is used to manage and report on foreign assistance funds. Last year, over $13 million was spent on this system, and over the years, over $225 million has been spent on this critical system. USAID's overall grade jumped from 3 straight Ds with your first 3 scorecards to an A the last 2. They are the only agency to receive an A on the Fitara scorecard. There are lots of positives here. Their CIO tenure is better than most. They have had only 2 CIOs since 2009. They have A's in 4 of the 5 areas. They report the second highest portfolio stat savings as a percentage of their overall spend. Management of their software licenses has been centralized since 2004, resulting in an A in this area. The one area where we did not see an A is on data center optimization. USAID still needs to meet the server utilization metrics for its 80-plus non-tiered or smaller data centers. Finally, I'd like to note that our work for this committee on CIO authorities shows that there is still some work to do on IT budgeting and execution, especially on improving governance over its IT acquisitions. Mr. Chairman, this concludes my comments on USAID.
Thank you, sir. Again, only one person is going to provide remarks for USAID. Who is that going to be? Mr. Warren, you're now recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you. Thank you, Chairman Hurd and Ranking Member Kelly and members of the subcommittee for inviting me here to testify today regarding USAID's progress on Fitara. We're grateful for your support on this effort. I brought with me today my colleagues Reggie Mitchell, who's USAID's Chief Financial Officer, and Jay Mahanan, who is our Chief Information Officer. They have both been very instrumental in our technology reform efforts, and I'm happy to have them with me here today and to help answer questions. As you know, USAID is a global agency. Our work is often done under the most difficult circumstances, from a tent in Mexico City after the recent earthquake to a small mission in East Timor where the internet connection is less than reliable to a refugee camp in Jordan. Strong and effective information technology systems are essential to USAID achieving its mission in a modern world. And so USAID is proud to have received the first A rating ever given under the Fitara scorecard. But it hasn't always been this way at USAID. 8 years ago, USAID's IT was in disarray. In Washington, we spent hundreds of thousands of dollars every year acquiring new equipment and on powering and cooling our data center. What we got for it were regular outages and a system that left employees tethered to their desks. In the field, the situation was even worse. USAID often operates in countries with low bandwidth, and our old email system did not function well in this environment, leaving many staff waiting for long periods of time for email messages to load if they were able to access email at all. 7 years ago, in February 2010, we realized that the status quo was not sustainable, and we began taking steps that ultimately gave USAID a cloud-based email system, and over the last few years, the agency has developed into the leading federal agency for cloud computing. So today I would like to share with you what we view as the 4 keys to our success. First, we accepted that updating our IT system would be risky, that we would run into problems, and that we would not get everything right the first time. We knew that we needed to improve, and we were willing to take those risks. We embraced change. Second, we had real buy-in from agency leadership. We realized that for USAID to remain the world's premier international development agency, modernizing our technology had to be a top priority. We committed significant financial and human resources to this effort and championed it from the top down. Third, we continue to improve, plan for what we know will come, and deliver results. Today, we have embraced a culture of incremental progress. And we regularly make small investments in our information systems that keep them from going out of date or losing interoperability. And I'm proud to say that because of these investments, USAID is not operating a single legacy system. And fourth, we committed to hiring experts at a senior level who have the technical know-how to implement these changes and keep us ahead of the curve. We worked hard to recruit knowledgeable, experienced staff and provide training and support for the staff we have. All of this hard work has led to important increases in efficiency for our workforce and significant cost savings that today we are using to reinvest in our platforms. Moving forward, we will ensure that we continue to remain ahead of the curve and lead the U.S. government in our embrace and effective use of modern information technology. To further optimize data center operations, the agency is in the process of migrating our already outsourced data center to a cloud environment, and USAID is taking steps to actively manage the cybersecurity risks that we all are aware of today. So in conclusion, we are committed to maintaining our status as a federal leader in the IT space. We look forward to collaborating with you to address future challenges and new opportunities for reform. Thank you for your time, and thank you for your support of our efforts.
Well, Mr. Warren, thank you for not taking all of your time, number one. And I also want to say thank you for what your organization does. I had the honor of serving alongside many of the men and women in USAID, and I know the work that you do and saw it up close and personal. And Mr. Mitchell and Mr. Mahanan, you facilitate that activity. So what you do is very important, not only for our country, but for the countries that we are working in. So I am a supporter of your organization. That being said, Mr. Warren, my first question is, why does Mr. Mahanan not report directly to you or Ambassador Green?
Thank you. We have, in our agency, we have an assistant administrator for management, and she has responsibility for the CFO function, the CIO function, the built facilities management, and the budget of the operational budget for the agency. She reports to me. But the CIO and the CFO both have a dotted line to the administrator. They are free to go to him directly when they have issues that are of concern to them, and that's the way we've been managing ourselves over the last number of years. You may be aware, however, that we are in a redesign effort with the State Department now to look at how the State Department and USAID work together and how we can change our procedures internally to make them more effective, and looking at the reporting relationships of the CIO and the CFO as part of what we're looking at now.
Mr. Powner, do you have any opinion?
I think clearly it's much better if you report up to the box, right? And I think as long as there's access, we've seen sometimes where there's this management guru in between, and we've heard this. The key question is whether that access is consistent and enough to the top when you need to get the right decisions and the right support.
Mr. Mahanan, I'm going to assume that since there's only been 2 CIOs since when, Mr. Powner?
Since 2009.
Since 2009, I'm assuming you have a positive opinion of your access to senior leaders within your organization.
Yes, I do. I mean, anytime there's a need to escalate, I will do that. But in the current structure, there's no need. As far as the assistant administrator for management, I mean, my daily interaction is with her. And so don't have the need to actually go to her or go to the administrator. Most of my activities go through her.
Can you answer with 100% certainty that you know everything's on your network?
Maybe 99.9%. On our network, we do have monitoring software. I'm talking about the physical network here. So we do have port security. We have anything that actually touches a network, we're notified of that. What I'm not really sure about is really the services that's purchased outside and is not necessarily connected to the network. That is something that that we actually track in terms of looking at the software. But there's a potential of shadow IT within the agency, and that is the only thing that I'm not positive about.
How do you do CDM?
CDM is, right now we're in phase 1, and it's scheduled to be deployed in February of 18.
deployed in 18, so complete within 4 months.
Yes, I mean, we've actually started about 2 years ago. We've piloted CDM, and so the final deployment is in February of 18.
So the pilot deployment, do you have the enforcement mode engaged?
I believe so.
Can you
I
give
have
me
to check.
can you give me an answer?
Yes, I can.
Thank you. Mr. Mitchell, how are you going to help Mr. Mahanan create a working capital fund once MGT is complete, so when he is able to get a complete insight into his network and saves money, he has access to that working capital fund?
We would, I will be able to support our Chief Information Officer by setting up this fund and working with them to develop the procedures and policies governing the operations of this particular fund. I think it's important to note that the budget per se does not fall under my purview, but I do have budget execution, and I do work with Mr. Mahadan and his staff as far as providing them with real-time data, executional data, so that he can better have decision-making capabilities.
So if the budget doesn't fall under the CFO, who does the budget fall under?
The operation budget, including the capital investment fund, falls under the Office of Management Policy, Budget, and Planning office, and that office is located in the Management Bureau.
And Mr. Warren, that is this person you
Yes,
described to that reports
the
directly to
Assistant
you?
Administrator for Management is responsibility for the CFO, the CIO, and the operational budget.
So, Mr. Warren, in my remaining 15 seconds, what are you going to do to help to make sure Mr. Mahanan has the MGT working capital fund so he can use that when at the end of next fiscal year?
Well, as I stated, the senior leaders of the agency, both the career and the political staff, are very supportive of the IT function, and we recognize that we can't do our work around the world without it. And I, Jay, and Reggie and I work closely to ensure that our IT needs are met, so I'd be very supportive.
Ms. Kelly, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you. The IT dashboard is a public website that allows federal agencies, industry, and the general public to see the details about federal information technology investments and their risk. Those risks are submitted by the CIO for those agencies. Mr. Powner, can you briefly explain why the IT dashboard exists and what factors affect scoring?
So the IT dashboard is there to make sure we have visibility into the major investments. When you look at the roughly $100 billion that we spend, so that's roughly half of them is on these major or larger investments. So we know what they are, and we also have some costs and schedule performance. But a key part of that is the CIO rating. So for instance, USAID has 87 major investments. Interestingly, they get an A in this area because they don't have a single green on the dashboard. Everything's red or yellow, where they acknowledge risk. You could view that different ways. We like to see the acknowledgement of risk because these things are typically difficult, and you want to admit the risk so that they can be effectively managed.
And you talked about USAID, but the other agencies in general, are they doing a good job accurately reporting, not doing a good job? And what are the implications for not accurately reporting?
I think over time, especially with your scorecard, we see more risk acknowledged on that dashboard. So that's been a good thing. There's some agencies that have had a complete flip. They were all green, and then all of a sudden they're heavy on the reds and yellows, which that's a more accurate reporting. So we've seen improvements in this area. There's still some concern. Yeah, the other area of concern is sometimes that some large investments are categorized as non-majors, and that's one way to hide visibility on the dashboard. And again, we know who those agencies are, and we're kind of watching some of those larger non-majors.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Mahanan, in the category of transparency, USAID received transparency and risk management in A. Can you briefly explain how USAID goes about determining the levels of risk facing its major IT projects?
Sorry.
That's okay.
For us, we have five major business cases. 3 of them is in operations, and so, but they provide critical functions for the agency. And so what we take a look at, we start previously taking a look at the mid-rating here as far as the risk is concerned. So, we look at the projects that's being executed. We looked at the overall importance of the specific program, and then we make a determination of what is happening to specifically in the activities in those areas. And so quarterly, when the report comes to me, I take a look at it, we review it with the program staff, and make a determination exactly where we feel that the risk rating should reside. For the most part, we start with a 3. We start with a 5 because some of these business cases were in operations, and we didn't think necessarily that it's something we need to really worry about. But given the fact we heard from GAO in terms of we want to see the risk rating, realized, and actually we rethought what we were doing, and then started at 3, and then we would make decisions based on where we are with those projects within those business cases or investments. We would make a decision whether or not that the project itself was risky or not risky. But we continue just to start at a 3 and then move our way back and forth between a 1 and a 5.
Just out of curiosity, because you have done so well with your A ratings, do other agencies ever call and find out what you've done or what your secret is?
Yeah, we've gotten calls from about 5 agencies. We've spoken to them. We've actually spoken to the CPIC working group for GSA and some of the things we've done. I mean, just from a history perspective, some of the things we've done before, previously, like the data center consolidation. We got rid of our data center in RRB in 2011. We just didn't get credit for it as we move along because we started really early in that. And from our perspective is that we just wanted to make sure that the data itself and the information and the reason behind the specific intent of each one of these scores. And so we looked at that because I thought we did really well. We continue to do well, and I wanted to make sure that our progress, our performance reflects to the score. And that's when we actually found out there were some errors in how we were reporting. And so we basically worked with GAO and figure out where those areas are corrected and basically provide the evidence that we are where we are with those scores. And that's why you saw from a D to an A.
If I could just add a thought, our approach and attitude about IT risk, I think, is part of a broader agency perspective on risk. And we work in some dangerous, risky places around the world, and so we try as an agency to be very aware of and forthright about the risks that we're facing. And Reggie and I actually lead an agency-wide risk assessment process every year that looks at IT risks, financial risks, physical security risks. And so the sort of transparency that we bring to the IT risk, I think, is part of a broader culture in the agency about confronting risks.
I yield back.
The gentleman from Montana is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Warren, I understand from your testimony that you've moved 100% to the cloud. Is that correct?
I would say, again, maybe 99.9%.
Okay.
There's a portion.
Let me congratulate you on your aggressiveness adoption of these newer technologies. I'm curious, in that transition, how much work was done to move from, let's say, more custom software to more commercial off-the-shelf software? And where would you be in that transition?
So as far as moving to the cloud, there's specific things that we have in terms of infrastructure as a service, platform as a service, or software as a service. Every application we look at, we basically make a determination. We go back to the cloud-first policy. Any new application comes up, we look at it. We basically said whether or not there's a service offering out there that we can actually use. So, for instance, when we were modernizing our intranet on our internet, we basically look at the specific services, and we actually went with cloud services instead of going with software or commercial off-the-shelf software. So those are the types of decisions we make when we actually look at software or look at renewed software.
Mm-hmm. And Mr. Pauner, is there in your observations, I mean, we know that when we send a committee off to design a piece of software and we tell them we want a horse, we often get a camel as a result because there's so many requirements that are included. And this, when we build custom software, it just drives up the costs and increases brittleness of integrations and these sorts of things. In your observations from working with the agencies, where are we in this transition from custom designing everything to the bias that Mr. Mahan has expressed towards commercial off-the-shelf software?
Collectively, as a government, we still custom design way too much than we need to. And the problem there is that in the government, changing your business process to adapt to commercial products is we're way behind, especially when you compare that to the private sector. There's such an unwillingness to adapt those business processes and adopt the commercial software. So we need more and more of that going forward.
But you believe that a bias towards commercial off-the-shelf would be a best practice, and it would reduce costs?
Absolutely, absolutely, and change our business processes. I look at these financial management systems that we try to put in place. Why do some folks implement them right out of the box, and others we try to modify and spend 3 years to implement a commercial financial management system?
Yeah. Mr. Mitchell, in this transition, how much money has been saved moving to the cloud?
I would have to defer to our Chief Information Officer.
I think we'd have to look at each specific offering. For example, our data centers, from 13 to 16, we saved about $8 million. But we haven't, I don't think we have accumulated the number of our savings. I think it's about, for the last, we calculated about maybe 50 to 60 million for the last 3 or 4 years.
Just to put that in perspective, what percentage is that of your total budget?
It's about, so our budget is about $100 million in OE and about 25 in DME. So that would actually be about 60%.
60% savings from moving to the cloud?
Yeah.
Okay. And what have you experienced from a system reliability and security perspective? Has system reliability and security gotten better, or is it harder in the cloud?
I think it's gotten better. I mean, I think as Mr. Warren said, when we first moved email to the cloud, I think we had outages daily. We moved to a cloud email system. I think we were the second in the federal government to do that. And I can't remember being down for more than an hour till now. And that's happened in 2011, I think we started.
And from a security perspective?
They go through the same controls as far as testing is concerned. So, we look at their CNA packages. We give it an ATO, so we have a part to play in basically looking at the security profile of each one of these cloud vendors. So we're pretty confident the security is actually, I would say, much better than having a system administrator all these different places, not necessarily looking at what they're doing. So within the cloud, there's a single administrator. We control that administrator.
Yeah.
So I think security is enhanced as well.
Just to play back what I've heard, a 60% reduction in costs, dramatic increase in reliability, better security. Sounds like it's a win.
We think so.
Okay. Thank you. I yield back.
Thank you. Now, the gentleman from the Commonwealth of Virginia, you're on the clock.
Thank you. And congratulations to USAID. And I take a little bit of special interest. In my previous incarnation here in the Hill, before my 20 years in the private sector, I spent 10 years on the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, and my job was to write the foreign aid bill. And I helped write the very last one to become law in 1986. That's how ancient I am. It was so good, apparently, that we haven't passed one since. In any event, congratulations. And I think, well, let me ask you, Mr. Warren, what happened? You were getting a D, and you moved it up to an A, and I'm talking process and political decisions here, not we moved the grommet to the widget and the widget to the, I mean, what happened inside aid that changed the will to want to do it differently?
So two points to make. I think the jump from the D to the A was largely from working with GAO to better report what we have been accomplishing over a longer period of time. So if you look at the scorecard, it looks like we had this quantum leap in 1 year. I think the quantum leap was really in better reporting. The changes to get from a D to an A took place over a longer period of time than that. But to answer the other part of your question, I think we were driven by the fact that we were having failures daily in the system as we were trying to manage it, and the fact that we have a worldwide workforce, and the only way we can communicate with our staff around the world and get our work done is through our IT systems, and if they're not working, we just can't do our job. And so it was kind of out of necessity that we realized we needed to make big changes. And then, as I said, the political and the career.
Well, I would just say, you say that as if, of course, we had no choice. I'm looking at a really big neighbor of yours in the federal family, maybe the biggest, and it hasn't concluded that, and it's got a worldwide enterprise too. And they're getting an F instead of an A. So something happened in aid that galvanized you to do it differently, to make different decisions, to set goals for yourself that unfortunately our Defense Department has yet to do. And it could batch you person per person and then some in terms of overseas bases, operations, personnel, and the like. Bigger, much bigger, maybe you could argue more difficult, but it's as far flung as you are, and it has yet to make the decisions or show the political will you've shown. And that's what I'm trying to get at. Because I think that's how we all learn. You know, go talk to USAID in terms of how they did it, and I'm trying to get you on the record to get some of the elements of how did you do it. And Mr. Pounder, feel free to jump in here, because I know you had something to do with this as well.
Yeah, I think it's a combination of both. I mean, clearly the data cleanup was a part, but also there was a focus on some of these areas, you know, going small and reporting more risk and that type of thing. We saw big improvements there. You know, it was interesting because a lot of this data has been reported to OMB for quite a while. And honestly, most agencies don't really focus on that adequately enough. This scorecard really helped with, and this is important reporting because it's savings, it's things that we can use to reinvest in the working capital funds. So this isn't just for the sake of reporting, it's real stuff that we need to actually get more efficient with our operational side of the house so that we can invest and modernize the government more.
Yep. And by the way, Mr. Mitchell, I hope your answer to Mr. Gianforte about savings was only on that one, because it's critical that the CFO understand what savings are being effectuated here, because that's how we incentivize other agencies to do it too, right? Here's the carrot. Here's the reward at the end of this process, and that's reliability, savings, freeing up capital, really worthwhile investment, and a happier, more productive workforce. But some of that we can measure in actual dollars, and I commend to you that the CFO, as well as the CIO, has to be monitoring those savings. I assume you are.
Yes,
Okay.
I am.
Okay. Let me just say, end by saying this, and maybe Mr. Warren, you take the lead working with Mr. Pounder at GAO, but all of you. I really think it's important that this be written up electronically, but how did you do it? What were the key decision points? How low did you have to go before somebody said enough already? And show others that it's doable and replicable. Because when we don't really want to do something, we're gonna isolate you as saying USAID is unique, no one else is like them, sure they can do it, but no one else can really. And we don't want, that doesn't serve our purpose at all, and it's not true. And Dave, Mr. Pounder, I would urge that in your spare time, we help do this, and hopefully Mr. Hurd and Ms. Kelly would agree. There's real value here in your story, and we want to spread that good news to other agencies that it can be done in a reasonable time frame, and there's a reward at the end of the rainbow. So again, thank you and congratulations.
I'd just like the record to reflect that that is the least grumpy line of questioning I've ever seen from the gentleman from the Commonwealth of Virginia, which is a pretty significant feat. Mr. Warren, Mr. Mitchell, Mr. Mahanan, these don't always go this way, and thank you for what you're doing. Thank you for the support that you're showing our men and women that are putting themselves in some very difficult and extraordinary circumstances. Thank you for being here. And again, the subcommittees will now briefly recess for a few minutes for a third panel. The subcommittees stand in recess, subject to the call of the chair. The subcommittees will come to order. I'm pleased to introduce our third panel. Mr. Powner, for the third time today, thank you for being here. Mr. Maria Rote, CIO for SBA. Mr. Tim Greben, CFO for SBA. And Ms. Althea Coetzee Leslie, the Deputy Administrator at the Small Business Administration. Thank you all for being here. Welcome to you all. And pursuant to committee rules, all witnesses will be sworn in before they testify. Please rise and raise your right hand. Do you solemnly swear or affirm the testimony you are about to give is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God? Thank you. Please let the record reflect that all witnesses answer in the affirmative. Again, to allow time for discussion, and we're racing against the clock. The votes are likely to be called soon. Please limit your testimony to 5 minutes. Yellow light 30 means you have 30 seconds. Red, time is up. And please turn on the microphone. Mr. Powner, you're recognized for an abbreviated time for your opening remarks on this panel.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. SBA spends about $98 million on IT this year. About 80% of this is used for operational systems, leaving just over $20 million for new development. This new development includes important efforts like its disaster credit management modernization, which automates processing and approval for disaster loan assistance. SBA reports having spent over $150 million on this modernization in prior years. SBA's grades have consistently been in the D range, but their current grade is a C-. They are one of only 3 agencies whose grade went up. SBA scores best in incremental development, receiving an A in this area. Also, despite receiving a C in the data center area, SBA has plans to eventually close all but one of its 43 non-tiered or smaller centers and plans to install the necessary metering equipment by 2018. SBA also plans to exceed OMB's key server utilization metric of 65%. Turning to areas where SBA needs to improve, let's start with CIO tenure. Since 2004, there have been 10 CIOs at SBA, and the average tenure has been only 1.4 years. This is a major issue and why IT has not been effectively managed. Their software license inventory is not complete. They have a plan to complete this in early 2018. Finally, I'd like to note that our work for this committee on IT budgeting, contracting, and CIO authorities shows that additional areas where SBA's CIO has challenges is in budget formulation and strengthening their IT workforce. However, regarding Fitara's requirement for CIOs to review and approve IT contracts, SBA's processes here are quite good. Mr. Chairman, this concludes my comments on the Small Business Administration.
Thank you, sir. And I believe Ms. Althea Coates Leslie are going to do the opening remarks for the SBA panel. You're now recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, ranking members, and committee members, thank you for the opportunity to discuss the SBA's implementation of Fitara. From July 2005 to October 2016, the SBA's OCIO leadership team experienced significant disruption with high turnover, 8 different CIOs during that period. Further, prior to the current CIO's arrival in October 2016, the CIO position was vacant for over a year from July 2015 to October 16. Consequently, key programs like the Data Center Consolidation Initiative did not receive OCIO leadership attention. Immediately upon her arrival, the SBA CIO engaged in frank and honest conversations about the state of IT at the agency. The CFO responded in kind, and with the administrators and CFO's support, the CIO embarked on a fast-paced journey to change how the SBA builds, buys, and manages information technology to support small business entrepreneurs. Over the last 12 months, actions taken by the CIO in close partnership with the CFO are transforming SBA from an agency impeded by outdated technology and unstable infrastructure, stovepipes, duplication and significant gaps, no cybersecurity strategy or operational control, to a proactive and innovative provider of critical business technology services to the SBA program offices and small business entrepreneurs. SBA's governance model is maturing with focus on creating and expanding strong enterprise shared services. Program governance requires that all stakeholders are represented, engaged, and aligned to achieve program success. For example, the CIO and CFO co-chair the SBA Investment Review Board that met 6 times in fiscal year 17. The IRB reviewed every major investment at least once, and the board recommendations resulted in tangible program improvements. Additionally, the CIO conducted 4 major investment deep dives to review milestones, technology capabilities, funding, and risks. During one of these deep dives, the CIO identified and provided direction to correct specific contractual and roadmap-related issues in time to prevent further complications. The SBA recognizes that transparency is critical for value creation, and the CIO promotes transparency in our IT procurements to prevent duplication, cybersecurity threats, and stovepiping. Last year, the CIO reviewed and approved all new IT contracts above $150,000. And this year, the threshold has been reduced to $50,000 to ensure we achieve our short and long-term modernization objectives. It is our responsibility to communicate our IT goals, vision, and strategy with acquisition professionals to ensure that the entire organization understands the technical ramifications of individual purchases. I am proud to report the SBA is leading innovation as the first agency to deploy DHS's CDM system in the cloud. This has resulted in a significant cost avoided by not investing in hardware that would require future recapitalization. Further, it sets the stage and puts SBA ahead of other agencies for future DHS cloud-based CDM solutions that will further strengthen SBA's cybersecurity posture. Along with our modernization efforts in technology, we are building our IT workforce and working to attract new IT staff to critical positions. We launched an IT strategic workforce plan to be able to support future technology initiatives. And thanks to congressional approval, we realigned our digital services team under the CIO to deliver improved mission-focused services and capabilities. Through the implementation of the authorities contained in Fitara, our CIO is leading the charge in the achievement of agency-wide IT goals. The SBA's actions taken over the last 13 months are laying the foundation for the agency's transformation into future enterprise objectives. As we proceed in executing our enterprise IT plan, we will continue to strengthen information technology to ensure a reliable, secure, and high-performing computing environment necessary to enable the SBA to efficiently and effectively perform its mission. Thank you again for the opportunity to share SBA's progress on Fitara implementation, and we are ready to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you. And because votes have been called, we're going to limit our questioning, the timer, to about 2.5 minutes. So, Mr. Gianforte, you're up first.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So, Ms. Rote, sounds like you walked into a mess. And I'm just curious, what advice would you have for other federal CIOs, given the experience you've had in trying to get your arms around it?
Don't plan to plan, execute. Walking into a failing data center, our primary data center, we moved very quickly. We had failing HVAC systems. Last November, I said very clearly to the team, no new hardware, period. And that's what embarked us moving forward on our data center, shutting down our primary data center, moving into the cloud very quickly, very fast. I brought in the right talent to do that, to be able to do that, and we executed. And it was driven by failing data centers, the gaps in technology, all of those things, and we executed.
Okay. Just for my edification, where are you in the transformation to the cloud at this point, if you had to put a percentage on it?
So for our primary data center, we've moved about 40 systems already. We are not doing a lift and shift. We modernized everything first. So we did a migration, an actual architecture. We did a migration planning session, and we started execution of the migration in July of this year. So of the 200 systems that are in our primary data center, we've done about 40 right now.
Okay, so what percentage would you say is in the cloud?
That's roughly about 25 to 30% right
Okay.
now.
And what success have you had in moving departments off of custom software onto commercial off-the-shelf software?
To the extent that we're not building our own code, not doing our own coding, take advantage of commercial off-the-shelf, software as a service, platform as a service, we're doing it. For one of our program offices, they needed some investigation software. We're using a particular product, which is a software solution, right in our cloud environment. So we are driving in that direction and getting away from actual hands-on coding.
Okay. With that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Robin Kelly, you're on the clock.
Mr. Powner, in GAO's assessment, I am assuming that you gave recommendations to SBA to improve their grades and in software licensing. Is that correct?
Yes, we've been working closely with SBA.
Okay. So, Ms. Roth and Mr. Gribben, do you believe you can implement these recommendations within the next year? And what do you think you can do? What do you think you can accomplish?
For the software licensing, specifically, there's three pieces to that we're taking into account. One is reducing the footprint of duplicative software. So that's the very first piece. We're reducing the number of licenses and providing the right level of software licenses to the users that need it. When you look at particular software platforms, you know, there's different levels. We're making sure they're assigned. So we've already embarked on getting our arms around our licensing, in particular as we're moving into the cloud, getting our arms around that. We've put the monitoring tools in place. So we started a couple of months ago with this process and getting our arms around all of our software. And a year ago, I didn't have visibility into the entire enterprise. I do now. So that way, that gives me the capability to be able to see what licenses are out there, what's deployed, not just in the cloud, but also on the desktop and the systems.
I don't know if you had any comment.
The only thing I would add to that is that as part of the budget execution process, the CIO has visibility into all of the IT requests of the program offices. And this year, we identified some offices that had some software licenses that would be better incorporated into an enterprise agreement that the CIO had already embarked on. So from that, we're reducing the software licenses, the one-offs that are in the program offices.
Okay, it sounds like you're committed to making improvements, so we look forward to seeing your grades improve. I yield back.
Mr. Conley.
I thank the chair. I just, gosh, at risk of destroying my reputation with the chairman, I think there's a lot of good news here. And a lot of it has to do, though, with having a CIO who, A, has the political will herself, but also a direct tie to the head of the agency so that she is empowered. And I assume you concur with that?
Yes, we do. Our CIO has direct access to the administrator and myself as a deputy, and has also the authority to, or has control over authority to operate, and we have empowered her to do whatever's necessary to protect the agency and make sure that we're delivering the products as best we can.
Sounds like you were, before this CIO, Ms. Rout, it sounds like you were handing out glasses of hemlock or something, given the turnover that was occurring. So I don't know what you've done to make it a more pleasant and attractive place, but keep doing it. Ms. Rout, did you want to comment on that? Not the hemlock so much as.
Not the hemlock?
but the turnover and.
Well, I can't speak to my predecessors. There were some very good people there, but I will say that I've got an incredible relationship with the CFO, and then with access to the administrator and the deputy administrator. Myself and my deputy make the rounds informally about once a day in the front office, and we do have actual formal standard meetings and
Right.
participate in many of the boards.
Just final point, you actually met the metrics set for you by OMB on data center consolidation in terms of savings, as I understand it. Keep doing it, double down on it. I think that's really important, and that's how we reinvest in ourselves once the MGT legislation becomes law. Thank you, and congratulations on the progress you've achieved. Keep doing it.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Conley. Mr. Powner, what do they need to do in order to get that N to a Y in the CIO reporting directly to the Secretary or the Deputy
It's
Secretary?
just not a formal reporting. There's access from what we understand, but in terms of the reporting, I don't see the direct reporting there to the DEP Secretary, to the assistant.
Ms. Coates-Letson, do you have any opinion on making that a more formal structure to ensure the CIO reports directly to you or Administrator McMahon?
We have several changes that we're looking at with agency reform, and this is certainly one that we are considering.
That's great.
And Mr. Chairman, I would add, I think what's really important here is we got this history of 1.4 years. Hopefully, Ms. Roth sticks around more than 1.4. But I think that change is important because clearly this is an executive team that we hear that are working well together and things are happening and there's great plans. But I think that's why that formality is important, the 1.4 history.
Ms. Roth, I'm sure you are expecting my question on your ability to answer whether you have 100% visibility of what's on your network.
I do today. I did not a year ago.
And how are you deploying CDM?
We deployed CDM in the cloud last November when I said no new hardware in our data center. My team went back and they said, but, and And I said, I want to put it in the cloud. And I said, why not? And I asked them that frequently, why not? And they went back to DHS and proposed it. DHS said, let's go ahead and do it. And so we started small. Instead of buying 96 cores, spending all that money and all that hardware, we started small in the cloud, spinning up the virtual servers, adding on as we needed it. So phase 1 we completed this summer. So again, we're the first federal agency to do it.
Awesome. Mr. Gribben, I'm sure you can expect what my question is going to be. How are you going to help Ms. Rote create the working capital fund that MGT is going to give her, hopefully, as early as tomorrow?
That is actually something that I'm going to have to work with Office of Management and Budget and our Appropriations Committee in how that would be implemented. Currently, what we do is any savings that are...
Let me stop you there. What conversations do you need to have with OPM?
The conversation
OMB, excuse me.
Is most of the money that we spend on information technology is one-year money. And even with a reprogramming request into a working capital fund, would still remain as one-year money.
But that's what the legislation is changing, where the working capital fund gives the ability to, once you program that money into a working capital fund, you have 3 years to gain access. So what you're going to ultimately need is guidance from OMB on the steps to making that happen.
Exactly.
I would welcome your suggestions on those kinds of guidance. We should be going to OPM and OMB, excuse me, and Ms. Rote. Your suggestions on how to do that would be very helpful as well, to ensure that you have one more tool in your toolkit. Ms. Coates-Letsley, do you have any final comments on creating a culture within the organization to ensure you have Ms. Rote staying there for more than 1.4 years?
Well, I've been telling everybody on my road trips and every forum that I attend and where I speak that other than Disneyland, the SBA is the happiest place on earth, and we intend to keep it that way. With the current administrator and the leadership team that's there now, we have a very, very functional team and look forward to continuing that relationship and keeping Ms. Rote happy.
Excellent. Mr. Powner, you're a prince. Your team is amazing. Thanks for all the effort and work that you do on the scorecard. The minority and majority staffs work on this. I really do think it is a tool that has starting to see real changes across the federal IT infrastructure. And for all of our witnesses, thank you for appearing here today. The hearing record will remain open for 2 weeks for any member to submit a written opening statement or questions for the record. If there's no further business, without objection, the subcommittee stand adjourned.